That man stopped. An elderly man's trembling finger points at a photograph on a memory board, while his daughter Sarah collapses into sobs beside him, her hands covering her face. When everyone else kept driving, that man stopped. The old man's eyes are clouded with confusion, but in this moment, this single, crystalline moment, he remembers. He remembers the rain. He remembers the kindness. And he remembers being saved. But what Sarah doesn't know yet, what will shatter both their worlds in the most beautiful, impossible way, is that this stranger in the rain isn't a stranger at all. He's the final piece of a puzzle that began 2 years ago, on another rainy highway, with another broken-down vehicle, and a man named Thomas. The rain wasn't just falling. It was attacking Interstate 65 with a violence that turned the highway into a churning river of black asphalt and white foam. Marcus Johnson, 42 years old, squinted through his Peterbilt's windshield as the wipers fought a losing battle against the deluge. He was 6 hours into a 14-hour haul from Memphis to Detroit, carrying medical supplies that hospitals were desperately waiting for. Time was money, and every minute counted. Every delay meant another phone call from his dispatcher, another black mark on his record, and another reason for the company to pass him over for better routes. Marcus had $287 in his checking account, his truck payment was due in 3 days, and his ex-wife's lawyers had just filed another motion for increased child support. Money he didn't have. He couldn't afford complications, he couldn't afford to be late, and he couldn't afford to be a hero. But what Marcus saw through the rain-streaked windshield made his foot hover over the brake pedal, and made his heart suddenly pound against his ribs like a prisoner trying to escape. There, on the shoulder of the interstate, barely visible through the curtain of rain, stood a figure. Not walking, not waving for help, and not moving at all. Just standing there in the apocalyptic storm like a statue that had forgotten it was allowed to seek shelter. As Marcus's headlights swept closer, the details emerged from the darkness like a nightmare taking shape. It was an old man, maybe 75, maybe older, wearing nothing but a thin cardigan that clung to his frail body like a second skin. No coat, no umbrella, and no car in sight. Just an elderly man standing in a storm that could kill him, staring at nothing, and shivering so violently that Marcus could see it even from 50 yards away. Marcus's first instinct screamed at him to keep driving. His dispatcher's voice echoed in his head. "You're already behind schedule. Marcus, we need those supplies yesterday." The image of his bank statement flashed before his eyes, along with the stack of unpaid bills on his kitchen counter, and the disappointed face of his 9-year-old daughter Emma when he'd had to cancel their last weekend together. He couldn't afford to stop, he couldn't afford to get involved, and he couldn't afford to care. Then the old man turned his head slightly, and for just a fraction of a second, their eyes met through the rain and the darkness. In that moment, Marcus saw something that made his blood run cold. The old man wasn't waiting for help. His hollow, empty expression was that of someone who had stopped hoping for it. This was a man who had already accepted what was coming, and was simply standing in the storm, waiting for the inevitable. Marcus cursed under his breath, slammed his palm against the steering wheel, and hit the brakes. The truck's air brakes hissed like an angry dragon as the massive vehicle shuddered to a stop about 30 feet past the old man. Marcus sat there for 5 seconds, then 10 seconds, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles went white, asking himself what the hell he was doing. Then he grabbed his emergency rain slicker from behind the seat, threw open the door, and jumped down into the storm. The rain hit Marcus like a physical force, instantly soaking through his jeans and boots despite the slicker. He jogged back to where the old man stood, and as he got closer, the situation became even more horrifying than he'd imagined. The man's lips were blue, not pale, but genuinely blue. His hands were shaking uncontrollably, his fingers curled into useless claws, and his eyes were unfocused, staring at something only he could see, somewhere far beyond the rain and the highway. This wasn't just an old man caught in bad weather. This was hypothermia. This was death standing patiently on the shoulder of Interstate 65, waiting to claim its next victim. "Sir," Marcus shouted over the roar of the storm, reaching out to touch the man's shoulder gently. "Sir, are you okay? What are you doing out here?" The old man's head turned slowly, like it took enormous effort to complete such a simple motion. His eyes tried to focus on Marcus's face, but seemed to struggle with even that basic task. When he spoke, his voice was a thin whisper that barely carried over the sound of rain hammering against the pavement. I was supposed to, my daughter. She was coming." The words trailed off into confusion, and the old man's eyes went vacant again, staring back at the empty road behind them as if he expected someone to appear at any moment. Marcus felt panic rising in his chest. This man was in serious trouble, critical trouble. "Come on, sir, let's get you out of this rain. My truck is right here. It's warm and I've got blankets." Marcus tried to guide him toward the Peterbilt, but the old man's legs wouldn't cooperate. They were stiff, moving like wooden posts, as if his body had simply given up on taking commands from his brain. Marcus ended up half carrying, half dragging the elderly man to the truck, the rain pounding them both mercilessly, each step feeling like it took an eternity. Getting him up into the cab was like trying to lift a bag of wet cement up a ladder. The old man couldn't help himself at all. His arms hung uselessly at his sides, his legs couldn't find the steps, and his body had simply shut down, conserving what little heat remained in his core. Finally, after what felt like an hour but was probably less than 2 minutes, Marcus got him into the passenger seat and slammed the door against the storm. Inside the cab, the heater was running full blast, and Marcus grabbed every blanket and towel he had, 5 in total, wrapping them around the shivering old man like he was building a cocoon. He cranked the heat even higher until the cab felt like a sauna, until sweat started beading on his own forehead. The old man sat there, trembling violently, his teeth chattering so hard Marcus was genuinely afraid he'd crack them. "What's your name, sir?" Marcus asked, rubbing the man's arms through the blankets, trying to generate warmth, and trying to pull him back from the edge of wherever his body was threatening to go. "Can you tell me your name?" It took almost a full minute before the old man's lips moved. "Robert," he whispered, the word barely more than a breath. "Robert Coleman." His voice was slightly stronger now, just barely. The warmth was starting to reach him, pulling him back from whatever dark place his mind had drifted to. Marcus reached into his cooler and pulled out a thermos of hot coffee he'd made that morning. "Robert, I need you to drink this. Small sips. It's going to help warm you up from the inside." He held the cup to Robert's lips, and the old man drank, spilling some down his chin, his hands too shaky to hold anything, but getting enough down to matter. But Marcus was about to discover that saving Robert from the storm was only the beginning. What he didn't know was that Robert wasn't just a confused old man caught in bad weather. He was a father on a mission, and that mission would lead Marcus to a truth that would change everything. As color slowly started returning to Robert's face, and his shivering began to lessen from violent to merely constant, Marcus's mind was racing with questions. Where was this man's car? Where was his family? And how long had he been standing out there in the rain? 30 minutes, an hour, or longer? And why hadn't anyone else stopped? Marcus pulled out his cell phone to call 911, but before he could dial, Robert's hand shot out with surprising strength and grabbed his wrist. "No," Robert said, his voice suddenly clearer and more urgent. "No hospitals, no police, please." The desperation in his eyes was so intense, so raw, that Marcus hesitated. "Sir, Robert, you were dying out there, you understand that, right? I need to get you medical attention. I need to find my daughter," Robert interrupted, and for the first time, real emotion cracked through his confusion. Tears mixed with the rain still dripping from his face, cutting paths down his weathered cheeks. "She's in trouble. She called me. She was crying. She said she needed me. I had to go to her. I have to find her." Marcus felt his stomach tighten with understanding and dread. Okay, where does your daughter live? I can take you there. Just tell me where to go." Robert's face crumpled with frustration and fear. I don't remember. I can't. I had it written down. I had the address. It was in my pocket right here, but then the rain came, and I couldn't find the bus stop, and then I couldn't remember which direction I was supposed to go." He trailed off, looking down at his empty, wrinkled hands as if they had betrayed him, as if they should have held on to something more important than his own life. Marcus's heart sank. This wasn't just an old man caught in a storm. This was an old man with dementia or Alzheimer's, who had wandered away from wherever he was supposed to be, chasing a daughter he couldn't find. "Robert, where do you live? Let me take you home. Your family must be worried sick about you." Robert shook his head, becoming agitated, his hands gripping the blankets. No, I can't go home. Not until I find Sarah. She needs me." She was crying. My little girl was crying. The way he said "little girl" made Marcus realize something crucial. In Robert's confused mind, his daughter wasn't an adult. She was a child who needed her father. Time had collapsed for him, and past and present had merged into one urgent now. Marcus made a decision in that moment. He couldn't just drop this man somewhere and drive away, washing his hands of the situation. Something about Robert's desperation, his absolute conviction that his daughter needed him, it grabbed hold of something deep in Marcus's chest and wouldn't let go. Marcus thought of his own daughter, Emma, who he only saw every other weekend. What if one day Marcus needed her and couldn't find her? What if he was the one standing in the rain, lost and forgotten, his mind betraying him, but his heart still knowing that his child needed him? "All right, Robert," Marcus said quietly, making direct eye contact with the old man. "We're going to find Sarah together, you and me. But first, we need to figure out where to start looking. Do you have a wallet, any ID, anything that might help us?" Robert patted his pockets weakly and produced a soggy, falling apart wallet from his cardigan. Marcus opened it carefully, water dripping from the cracked leather. Inside was $6 in wrinkled bills, and a faded photograph of a young woman holding a baby, the edges worn soft from years of handling. There was also a driver's license that had expired 4 years ago, showing a healthier, stronger version of the man sitting next to him. The address on the license was from a town called Clarksville, about 45 minutes south. But there was something else tucked in the billfold section, partially obscured by the damp leather. A business card, water-damaged but still readable. Sarah Coleman Wright, Senior Project Manager, Vanderbilt Medical Center, Nashville, Tennessee. Marcus felt a surge of hope course through him. "Robert, is this your Sarah?" "Sarah Coleman Wright." Robert's eyes lit up like someone had flipped a switch. Yes, that's my Sarah. She works at the hospital. She's very important there. She saves people." The pride in his voice was so pure and so uncomplicated, it made Marcus's throat tighten with emotion. "Okay, we've got something to work with," Marcus said, pulling out his phone. He dialed the main number for Vanderbilt Medical Center. After being transferred 3 times, he finally got through to someone who could help. The phone rang once, twice, then 3 times. "This is Sarah Coleman Wright," a woman's voice answered, professional but with an edge of exhaustion. "Ms. Wright, my name is Marcus Johnson. I'm a truck driver, and I'm calling because I have your father with me. He's safe, but..." The phone exploded with noise before he could finish his sentence. "Oh my God, you found him. Is he okay? Where is he? We've been searching for 5 hours. The police, the memory care facility staff, everyone has been looking everywhere. Where are you?" Sarah's voice cracked with emotion, oscillating between relief and panic. "He wandered away from the memory care facility this afternoon. Someone left a door propped open during a delivery, and he just walked out. We didn't even know he was gone until dinner time. He doesn't have his medications. He doesn't have his coat. He's not supposed to be outside alone. Where are you? Please, tell me where you are." Marcus told her their location on Interstate 65, and Sarah said she'd be there in 30 minutes. But then she asked a question that made Marcus's blood run cold. "Did he say why he left? Did he tell you where he was trying to go?" Marcus glanced at Robert, who was now dozing fitfully under the pile of blankets. "He said you called him. He said you were crying and that you needed him. He was trying to find you." There was a long, terrible silence on the other end of the line. Marcus could hear Sarah's breathing, could hear the exact moment when understanding hit her like a freight train. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. I didn't call him. I haven't called him in. Oh God. Oh God. He doesn't even remember. Remember what? Marcus asked, confused. Sarah took a shuddering breath, and when she spoke again, Marcus could hear her crying. 6 months ago, I called my father in the middle of the night. I was going through the worst divorce you can imagine. My ex-husband was trying to take my son away from me, and I was falling apart. I called my dad, sobbing, begging him to tell me what to do. Her voice broke completely, but she forced herself to continue. He drove 3 hours in the middle of the night to my apartment. He held me while I cried, told me everything was going to be okay, and stayed with me for an entire week. He helped me find a lawyer, and he helped me put my life back together. He saved me. Sarah's breathing was ragged now. That was 6 months ago, Marcus. But in his mind, with his Alzheimer's, he thinks that call just happened. He thinks I need him right now, today, this moment. He escaped from the facility to save me, just like he did before. But this time, he couldn't remember how to get to me. His mind had erased everything except the one crucial fact. His daughter needed him, and he had to go to her. Marcus felt tears burning in his eyes. This old man, confused and lost, had walked into a storm to save a daughter who didn't need saving. Not because he was crazy, but because he was a father. And that's what fathers do. They show up. Even when their minds are breaking, even when they can't remember where they're going, and even when it might kill them, they show up. True to her word, Sarah arrived exactly 29 minutes later. Marcus saw her car's headlights appear in his side mirror as she pulled onto the shoulder behind his truck. She jumped out into the rain and ran to the passenger side of the Peterbilt. Marcus opened the door, and Sarah climbed up, tears streaming down her face. "Dad?" she whispered, touching Robert's face gently with both hands. "Daddy, I'm here." Robert's eyes fluttered open slowly. When he saw his daughter, his whole face transformed. The confusion melted away, replaced by pure joy and relief. "Sarah, I found you. I was so worried about you. Are you okay? Are you safe now?" Sarah completely broke down. She wrapped her arms around her father, sobbing into his shoulder. "I'm okay, Daddy. I'm okay. You found me. You always find me. You always come when I need you." She pulled back and looked him directly in the eyes. "I'm so proud of you. You're the bravest man I know. Do you hear me? The bravest man I've ever known." Robert smiled, that simple, childlike smile of someone who had accomplished their mission. "I'll always come when you need me, baby girl. Always. No matter what. Even if I have to walk through storms and floods and fire, I'll always come for you." He said it with such conviction that even without knowing what day it was or where he was, that one truth remained unshakable. He would always come for his daughter. Sarah turned to Marcus, and her expression was one of overwhelming gratitude. "How can I ever thank you? If you hadn't stopped, if you hadn't." She couldn't finish the sentence. They both knew that Robert would have been found days later, if at all, just another tragic statistic. Marcus shook his head. "I just did what anyone would do." But Sarah grabbed his hand, holding it tight. No, you didn't. Do you know how many cars drove past my father in the last 5 hours? Dozens of cars, maybe hundreds, and every single one of them saw him standing there. Every single one of them made a choice, and every single one of them kept driving. She looked at Marcus with intensity. "You're the only one who stopped. Out of hundreds of people, you're the only one." What does that say about our world? What does that say about us? The weight of that statement hung in the air of the truck cab. Marcus had been one decision away from being just another car that drove past. But he'd stopped, and that had made all the difference. An ambulance arrived shortly after, called by Sarah to check Robert's vitals and make sure he was stable. The paramedics were efficient and professional, checking his temperature, his blood pressure, and his heart rate, while asking him questions he couldn't quite answer. Their verdict was chilling. His core temperature was 94.3 degrees when we checked it just now, the lead paramedic said quietly to Sarah and Marcus. "That's moderate hypothermia. Another 30 minutes, maybe an hour in that rain, and we'd be looking at severe hypothermia. At his age, with that level of exposure, he wouldn't have made it. You saved his life. The paramedic looked at Marcus. You should feel proud of what you did tonight, sir. As they loaded Robert onto a stretcher to take him to the hospital for observation and to get him back on his medications, the old man suddenly became agitated, reaching out with his hands. Wait. I need to thank the man who helped me find Sarah. Marcus walked over quickly and took Robert's hand, the old man's grip surprisingly strong despite everything he'd been through. You don't need to thank me, sir. You would have done the same for anyone. Robert looked up at him with surprising clarity, as if for just a moment, the fog that clouded his mind had lifted, giving him one instant of perfect lucidity. No, he said firmly, his voice stronger than it had been all night. Not everyone stops anymore. People don't stop. But you stopped. That means something important. That means you're a good man. Don't ever forget that you're a good man. Then Robert reached into his pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out the waterlogged photograph from his wallet. The one of young Sarah holding a baby, the edges worn soft from years of being carried, looked at, and treasured. This is my Sarah when she had her first child, my grandson. She was so scared she wouldn't be a good mother. I remember, she called me crying. But I told her she'd be amazing. And she was. She's the best mother I've ever seen. He pressed the photo into Marcus's hand, folding Marcus's fingers around it. Keep this. I want you to have it. Remember that being there for people matters. It's all that matters in this life. Being there when you're needed. Marcus tried to give it back, understanding that this was probably Robert's only copy of a precious memory. Sir, I can't take this. This is your family. This is important to you. But Robert closed Marcus's fingers around it firmly. Keep it. Remember. Promise me you'll remember. Then the paramedics wheeled him away toward the ambulance, and he was gone, leaving Marcus standing in the rain holding a photograph of strangers who somehow didn't feel like strangers anymore. Sarah walked over, wiping tears from her eyes with the heel of her hand. I'm sorry, he doesn't understand that's our only copy of that photo. My mother took it, and she passed away 5 years ago. I can get it from you. I'll give you my address and everything. But Marcus shook his head, looking down at the faded image, at young Sarah's nervous smile as she held her baby, and at the joy and fear mixed together on her face. No, he wanted me to have it. He wanted me to remember. And I think I need to keep it. If that's okay with you. Sarah studied Marcus for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Can I ask you something? A real question, not just polite conversation. Why did you stop? Really? What made you stop when hundreds of others didn't? Marcus was quiet for a while, rain dripping off his jacket, the photo getting wet in his hand, and the sound of the ambulance doors closing in the background. I've been driving trucks for 15 years, he finally said, his voice low and rough. I've driven past 1,000 people who looked like they needed help. Maybe more than 1,000. And you know what I always told myself? I always said someone else would stop. It wasn't my problem. I was on a schedule. I had my own troubles. Someone else would handle it. He looked up at Sarah. But something about your dad, when our eyes met out there in the rain, I didn't see a stranger. I saw my own father. He died 2 years ago, alone in a nursing home in Kentucky. And you want to know something terrible? I was too busy to visit him the last 6 months of his life. Too busy working. Too busy being angry at him for stupid things that don't even matter anymore. Things I can't even remember now. Marcus's voice cracked, and he had to pause to collect himself. I kept telling myself I'd visit next month. Next month I'll have more time. Next month I won't be so angry. Next month I'll tell him I love him, that I'm sorry, and that I appreciate everything he did for me growing up. Next month. Next month. Next month. Tears mixed with rain on his face. And then he was gone. And all those next months disappeared. And I never got to tell him I loved him. I never got to say thank you for all the times he showed up for me when I was a kid, for all the times he put me first, and for all the sacrifices he made that I was too young and stupid to appreciate. Marcus wiped his eyes roughly with the back of his hand. When I saw your father standing in that rain tonight, I didn't see a stranger who needed help. I saw a second chance. I saw my dad. alone and needing someone to show up for him. And I couldn't drive past. Not this time. I couldn't be the person who doesn't stop. Not again. Sarah was crying again, tears streaming freely down her face. She stepped forward and hugged Marcus tightly. This stranger who had saved her father's life, and who had given her family more time together. Your father would be so proud of you, she whispered into his shoulder. Wherever he is, whatever comes after this life, he knows what you did today. He knows his son is a good man. They stood there for a moment, two people brought together by rain and chance and the decision to stop instead of keep driving. Then Sarah pulled back and said something that Marcus would never, ever forget. My father's mind is leaving him piece by piece, memory by memory. The doctors say he has maybe 6 months before the Alzheimer's progresses to the point where he won't remember my name, where he won't remember who I am or who he is, where everything that made him Robert Coleman will be gone. She smiled through her tears, a sad but somehow peaceful smile. But you know what he'll never forget? He'll never forget that he's a father who shows up for his daughter. That knowledge isn't stored in his memory where the disease can reach it. That's stored in his soul, in the very core of who he is. And nothing, not Alzheimer's, not time, not even death itself, can take that away from him. She looked at Marcus with gratitude and something deeper, recognition, perhaps, of a kindred spirit. You helped him be that father one more time tonight. You gave him the gift of being able to complete his mission, to save his daughter one last time. Even if it was a mission that didn't need completing, even if I wasn't really in danger, you let him be the hero father he's always been. You gave him that gift. Thank you. The ambulance pulled away, lights flashing in the darkness, carrying Robert to warmth and safety and the care he needed. Sarah followed in her car, but not before getting Marcus's phone number and making him promise, really promise, not just politely agree, to stay in touch. Marcus climbed back into his truck, now empty and quiet without Robert's presence. The cab felt larger somehow, colder despite the heater still running full blast. He set the wet photograph on his dashboard, propped up carefully against the GPS screen where he could see it. Then he picked up his phone and called his dispatcher. Hey, it's Marcus. I'm going to be about 3 hours behind schedule. I had to stop for an emergency. His dispatcher started to protest, started to lecture him about deadlines and contracts and commitments, started with the speech Marcus had heard a dozen times before. But Marcus cut him off. Fire me if you want to. Write me up. Put it on my record. I genuinely don't care anymore. I did the right thing tonight. And I'd do it again. Every single time, I'd do it again. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then his dispatcher sighed, a sound that carried years of its own regrets and missed chances. Just get those supplies there safe, Marcus. And drive careful out there. The roads are bad tonight. Marcus hung up and put the truck in gear. As he merged back onto the interstate, the rain finally beginning to let up, he looked at Robert's photograph one more time. A young mother and her baby, frozen in time. Both of them loved by a man who would walk through storms to protect them, who would face death itself to reach them, even when he couldn't remember their names, even when his mind had betrayed him. Love like that doesn't require memory, Marcus realized. It requires heart. 2 days later, Marcus was back home in Memphis, sitting in his small apartment, and staring at the photograph still propped on his dashboard. His phone rang. It was Sarah. Marcus, I wanted to give you an update on Dad. He's doing okay. They got him stabilized and back to the memory care facility. He's confused about where he was and what happened, but he keeps telling everyone about the kind man who helped him find his daughter. Sarah paused, and Marcus could hear the emotion in her voice. There's something else the doctors found. When they were evaluating him at the hospital, they discovered the early stages of pneumonia developing in his lungs from the exposure. The doctor told me that if he'd been out in that rain for even another hour, the pneumonia combined with the hypothermia would have been too far advanced to treat. You didn't just find him, Marcus. You saved his life. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of that reality settle deep into his bones. One decision, one moment of choosing to stop instead of driving past. That was the difference between life and death, between a father seeing his daughter again and dying alone on a highway shoulder. 3 months after Robert's memory day, and 3 months after the gathering of family and love, Marcus received a call he'd been both expecting and dreading. Sarah's voice was thick with grief. Dad passed away last night. Peacefully. He was surrounded by family. At the end, he didn't know who we were anymore, but we knew who he was. And somehow that was enough. Marcus felt the loss deeply, surprisingly deeply for someone he'd only spent a few hours with. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. He was a truly good man." The last coherent thing he said, Sarah continued, her voice breaking, was about 3 weeks ago. He was having one of his clearer moments, and he was looking at the memory board. He pointed to your picture and said, "That man stopped for me." He didn't remember your name or exactly when it happened, but he remembered that you stopped. That was one of the last true, clear memories he had before everything went dark. The funeral was small and beautiful, held in the same community center where the memory day had taken place. Marcus sat in the back, not wanting to intrude on family moments, but Sarah had saved him a seat in the front row. "Your family," she'd insisted when he'd tried to protest. "You're part of his story. You belong here." During the eulogy, Sarah talked about her father's life. His 47 years as a carpenter, building houses all over Tennessee, his dedication to his family, never missing a school play or a soccer game, and his kindness to strangers, always willing to help anyone who needed it. But then, she did something unexpected. She called Marcus to the front of the room. "There's someone here who represents everything my father believed in," she said, gesturing for Marcus to join her at the podium. "Someone who showed me that my father's legacy isn't just in the houses he built or the family he raised, but in the example he set for how to live." Marcus reluctantly walked to the front, feeling every eye in the room on him, feeling completely unworthy of this moment. "I only knew Robert for a few hours," Marcus began, his voice shaking slightly. "But those few hours taught me more about being a man, and about being human, than I'd learned in 42 years of living." He looked out at the gathered family, at faces wet with tears and grief. Robert was lost that night, confused. His mind was failing him, but his heart knew exactly where it needed to be. He needed to be there for his daughter, and he was willing to die trying to get to her. Marcus pulled the now laminated photograph from his pocket, the one Robert had given him that night, the one he'd been carrying with him every single day since. "Robert gave me this picture and told me to remember that being there matters. It's all that matters. I look at this every single day, and every day it reminds me to stop, to show up, to be present for people who need it." He looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as he could. "Your father, your grandfather, your friend, he showed up his whole life. For all of you. For strangers. For anyone who needed him. And in his final act of showing up, even when his mind couldn't remember why, he taught a stranger how to really live. That's a legacy that will never die. Not as long as I'm alive to remember it and pass it on." Later, after most of the mourners had left, Sarah approached Marcus with a cardboard box. "I found something when I was going through Dad's things," she said, her expression unreadable. "Something you need to see." She handed him a worn leather journal, the kind with a clasp that locked, though the lock had long since broken. "This was my father's diary. He kept it for 40 years, wrote in it almost every single day. Sometimes just a sentence or two, sometimes pages and pages." Sarah opened it to a page marked with a yellow sticky note. "Read this entry. It's from 2 years ago, before his Alzheimer's got really bad. Before he started losing time." Marcus took the journal carefully, reverently, and read the neat handwriting that filled the page. The entry was dated March 15th, exactly 2 years before that rainy night on Interstate 65. "Today I saw something that broke my heart. I was driving home from the hardware store, taking the back roads because traffic was bad, when I saw a man on the side of Highway 41. He was standing next to a broken-down truck, hood up, looking desperate and defeated. I slowed down to help, but before I did, I watched. I watched as other cars passed him. One after another, people looked at him and kept driving. Nobody stopped. Nobody even slowed down. I pulled over and helped him fix his radiator hose. It was a simple fix, something that took maybe 20 minutes. We talked while we worked. His name was Thomas. He told me he was a truck driver, just like his son. Said he was behind on child support because work had been slow. Said he felt like a failure as a father, like he'd let everyone down. I told him something my own father told me when I was struggling. The only real failure is giving up on the people who need you. As long as you keep showing up, keep trying, you're not a failure. We finished the repair, and he thanked me. He had tears in his eyes. He said, "Nobody stops anymore. People just don't stop for each other." I told him, "Then be someone who stops. Break the cycle. Be the person who makes someone else's day better just by being willing to help." He drove away, and I never saw him again. But I've been praying ever since that he remembers that conversation. That somewhere out there, there's a man who learned that stopping matters, that helping people matters, that we're all in this together. Marcus looked up at Sarah, his hands trembling so badly, he almost dropped the journal. "Thomas," he whispered. "Thomas is my father's name. Was my father's name." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know. When I read that entry after Dad died, I looked up the date. Then I started searching. I found Thomas Johnson's obituary. He died exactly 6 months after this entry was written." She handed Marcus a printout of the obituary. Thomas Marcus Johnson, 67, of Lexington, Kentucky, passed away peacefully on September 12th. He is survived by his son, Marcus Johnson, a truck driver. Marcus felt his legs go weak. He had to sit down, his whole world tilting and spinning. His father had been helped by Robert on a highway 2 years ago. Robert had told his father to be someone who stops, to break the cycle of people driving past each other. And then, when Robert needed help, when Robert was the one standing on the side of the road, Marcus had stopped. It was a circle, a perfect, impossible circle of kindness that connected 2 families across time and tragedy and loss. "My dad never told me about this," Marcus whispered, staring at his father's name in the journal. "He never mentioned meeting someone named Robert. Never said anything about breaking down on Highway 41. Sarah sat down beside him on the church pew. "Maybe he didn't think it was important enough to mention. Or maybe he was planning to tell you and ran out of time. Or maybe he did tell you, Marcus. Just not with words. Maybe he told you through his actions. Through the example he set your whole life. Through all the times he stopped to help people, and all the times he showed you that kindness matters." Marcus thought back to his childhood, to memories he'd buried under years of resentment and guilt. His father stopping to help a neighbor fix a fence, giving money to a homeless veteran outside a truck stop, taking hours to teach Marcus how to change oil and how to fix a carburetor. His father had been showing him. His whole life, Thomas Johnson had been showing his son how to be someone who stops, and how to be someone who makes the world slightly better just by being in it. "I was so angry at him," Marcus said, his voice barely audible. "When he died, I was so angry that he'd left before I could tell him I loved him. Before I could say thank you. Before I could apologize for being too busy, and for being a terrible son." He looked at Sarah through tears. "And now I find out that he's the reason I stopped that night. He's the reason I saved your father. Your father taught my father to be someone who stops, and my father taught me, even though I didn't realize it until it was too late. Even from beyond the grave, he was still teaching me how to be a better man." Sarah reached out and took Marcus's hand. "You're not a terrible son. You're exactly the son your father hoped you'd be. You stopped that night because of everything he taught you, and everything he showed you about how to live. You honored him by stopping. You made his life matter by continuing his legacy." She squeezed his hand tighter. "Your father and mine, they're connected now forever. Through you. Through that night. Through the choice you made to stop instead of drive past. That's not coincidence, Marcus. That's something bigger. That's proof that the good we put into the world doesn't disappear. It echoes. It ripples. It comes back." Sarah wasn't finished. She reached back into the cardboard box and pulled out a small wooden container, about the size of a shoebox, but more carefully crafted. "There's one more thing Dad left. He made this about a month before he got too sick to work in his workshop. He must have made it during one of his clearer days. One of those moments when the fog lifted and he could remember what he wanted to do. She opened the box. Inside, nestled in soft cloth, was a hand-carved wooden compass. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every detail perfect, the wood polished to a soft glow, and the brass fittings precise and beautiful. It was the kind of thing that took hours and hours of patient work, of love poured into every cut and curve. On the back, burned into the wood with careful lettering, were words, "For the man who stops. May you always find your way home. Robert Coleman." Sarah lifted it out gently and handed it to Marcus. "He made this for you." Somehow, even with his memory failing, even with everything slipping away, he remembered that you were important. He wanted you to have something that would last, something that would remind you of what you'd done for him. Marcus held the compass, this final gift from a man he'd known for mere hours, but who had changed his entire life. The weight of it in his hands felt significant, meaningful in a way that went beyond its physical presence. "I don't deserve this," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah shook her head firmly. "You deserve it more than anyone. You gave my father dignity in his final journey. You gave him one last chance to be the hero father he'd always been. You gave our family extra time with him that we wouldn't have had if you'd driven past. You deserve every bit of gratitude we can possibly give you." Marcus looked at the compass through blurred vision, watching the needle settle and point north, steady and true. It was a metaphor he didn't miss. Even when lost, even when confused and unsure of your direction, you could find your way home if you had the right guidance, the right principles to follow. Robert had been his compass that night in the rain, pointing him toward the kind of man he wanted to be. And now Marcus would be a compass for others. The next Sunday, Marcus did something he'd been planning since Robert's funeral. He created a website called Truckers Who Stop. The concept was simple: a network of truck drivers across the country who pledged to help stranded motorists, to check on people walking along highways, and to be the eyes and hands of compassion on America's roads. He shared Robert's story in trucking forums, at truck stops, and on social media pages dedicated to drivers. He told the whole story: the rain, the rescue, the connection to his own father, and the circle of kindness that had come full around. The response was overwhelming. Within a week, 200 drivers had signed up. Within a month, over 1,000. They shared their own stories of people they'd helped, lives they'd changed, and disasters they'd prevented simply by choosing to stop. One driver found a teenage runaway and got her to a safe shelter before anything terrible could happen. Another found an elderly woman whose car had died and drove her 40 miles to her granddaughter's wedding so she wouldn't miss it. Another stopped for what he thought was a stranded motorist and ended up performing CPR on a man having a heart attack, keeping him alive until the ambulance arrived. Each story that came in, each life that was saved or changed, reminded Marcus that Robert's legacy was multiplying exponentially, spreading like ripples across water, touching people who would never know Robert's name, but were benefiting from his example anyway. Marcus kept Robert's compass on his dashboard, right next to the laminated photograph. They were his reminders, his North Star, and his constant connection to the night that had changed everything. Every time he saw someone who might need help, he remembered. And he stopped. Always. 6 months into the Truckers Who Stop program, Marcus received a letter. It had been forwarded through the program's website, passed along by moderators who thought Marcus needed to see it. The envelope was simple, the handwriting neat but shaky, as if written by someone with arthritis or Parkinson's. Marcus opened it and began to read. "Dear Marcus, you don't know me, but your program saved my life. My name is Jennifer, and last month I was driving home from my mother's funeral in Portland. She died suddenly, and I wasn't prepared. I wasn't ready. I'm an only child, and she was all the family I had left. I was crying so hard on Interstate 84 that I had to pull over. I sat there on the shoulder for over an hour, unable to move, unable to drive, just drowning in grief and loneliness and the terrible finality of death. A truck driver named Dale saw me and stopped. He didn't know what was wrong. He just knew someone needed help. He sat in his truck next to my car and waited until I could breathe again. Then he got out, knocked on my window, and asked if I was okay. We talked for 20 minutes. He told me about losing his own mother. He let me cry. He didn't try to fix anything or make it better. He just sat with me in my pain. When he finally left, when he was sure I was okay to drive, he gave me a card with your program's name and website on it. He told me about Robert Coleman, about an old man who walked into a storm to save his daughter, about Marcus, a trucker who stopped when no one else would. That story gave me hope. It reminded me that even in our darkest moments, there are people who will stop for us, people who will sit with us in our pain, people who prove that we're not alone. I want you to know that Dale saved my life that night, not just physically, but spiritually. He reminded me that kindness exists. And it all started because you stopped for an old man in the rain years ago. Thank you for creating a world where people like Dale exist. Thank you for teaching drivers that their job isn't just delivering cargo. It's delivering hope. With gratitude, Jennifer. Marcus read that letter 10 times, tears streaming down his face. Then he carefully folded it, placed it in a frame, and hung it in his apartment, right next to the photograph of Robert and the wooden compass. Evidence, proof, testimony that stopping mattered, and that one decision could create waves that reached farther than he could possibly imagine. Emma, Marcus's daughter, now 10 years old, asked him about the wall of memories one weekend when she was visiting. Dad, who are all these people? Why do you have their pictures and letters? Marcus sat down with his daughter and told her the whole story. He told her about the storm, and Robert, and Sarah. He told her about finding out his own grandfather Thomas was part of the chain, and he spoke about the compass, the photograph, and Dale and Jennifer and all the others. He explained how one single night had changed everything. Emma listened with wide, serious eyes, absorbing every word like it was the most important story she'd ever heard. When Marcus finished, she was quiet for a long moment, processing it all. Then she said something that made Marcus's heart nearly burst with pride and love. Dad, when I grow up, I want to be someone who stops too. Like you. Like Great-Grandpa Thomas. And like Mr. Robert. Marcus pulled her into a hug. This beautiful little girl who was learning the most important lesson life had to teach. You already are, baby girl. Every time you're kind to someone at school who's sitting alone at lunch. Every time you help your mom without being asked. Every time you choose compassion over convenience, you're already someone who stops. You're already making the world better. Emma hugged him tighter. Just like you. And just like Grandpa Thomas. And just like Mr. Robert. We're all connected, right? That's what you always say. Marcus realized in that moment that the chain wasn't just continuing. It was multiplying and growing stronger with each generation. His daughter would teach her children someday, and they would teach theirs. Robert's legacy, and his father's legacy, would outlive them all, spreading like roots underground, connecting everyone who chose compassion over convenience. 1 year after that rainy night on Interstate 65, Marcus received an invitation. He'd been asked to speak at a national trucking convention. 3,000 drivers from across the country gathered in Las Vegas to discuss the industry. Marcus stood on that stage, looking out at a sea of faces. Men and women who spent their lives on the road, who saw more of America than most people ever would, and who witnessed both the beauty and the brokenness of the country every single day. We spend our lives on these highways, Marcus began, his voice carrying through the massive convention center. We see everything. We see families on road trips, lovers driving to new beginnings, and people rushing to funerals and weddings and births. We see accidents, and breakdowns, and moments of crisis. He paused, letting the words sink in. And every single day, we pass people who need help. We make a choice, sometimes without even realizing we're making it. We decide whether to stop or keep driving, whether to get involved, or assume someone else will handle it. Marcus held up Robert's compass, the wood gleaming under the stage lights. This was made by a man whose mind was leaving him, but whose heart knew exactly what mattered. He taught me that stopping isn't weakness. It's not wasted time. It's not someone else's problem. Stopping is the bravest and most human thing we can do. He looked out at 3,000 faces, all listening intently. I'm asking you to join me in making a choice. The choice to be someone who stops. Not every time. We all have schedules and responsibilities. But when you see someone who truly needs it, when your gut tells you this person is in real danger, and when you know in your heart that if you don't stop, maybe no one will stop. The room was completely silent now. Be the person who breaks the pattern of indifference. Be the person who proves that humanity still exists on these highways. Be someone who stops. When Marcus finished speaking, the standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes. Afterward, more than 500 drivers signed up for the Truckers Who Stop program on the spot. The movement had reached critical mass. It was no longer just Marcus's tribute to Robert. It was becoming a cultural shift in how drivers saw their role on America's roads. News outlets picked up the story, and Marcus was interviewed on local television, and then the national news. Robert's story spread far beyond the trucking community, into schools and churches and dinner table conversations across the country. The simple tale of an old man in the rain and the trucker who stopped became a parable for modern life. A reminder that in our disconnected world, connection and compassion still mattered more than anything. Golden Stories family, we've reached the end of this journey, but this isn't really an ending. Marcus's story continues every single day, as drivers across this country stop for people who need help, as strangers become saviors, and as ordinary people choose to be extraordinary. Robert's story lives on in every act of kindness inspired by his example, in every person who stops instead of driving past, and in every life saved by someone who decided that another human being mattered more than convenience. But here's what I need you to understand. Really understand, down in your bones. The kindness you show today doesn't disappear. It ripples forward through time in ways you'll never see. Marcus's father Thomas helped Robert. Robert taught Thomas to be someone who stops. Thomas taught Marcus through his example, and Marcus stopped for Robert. Now, thousands of drivers are stopping for others because of that one rainy night. That's not just a heartwarming story. That's how humanity survives. That's how we save each other, one decision at a time. Right now, as you're watching this, someone is walking in their own storm. Maybe it's literal rain, or maybe it's grief, or loneliness, or desperation. They're one act of kindness away from hope. They are one person stopping away from survival. I'm asking you to be that person. Subscribe to this channel right now, and join this community of people who are committed to stopping, to showing up, and to being present in moments that matter. Comment the word stop below if you're ready to be someone who stops for others. Not because it's easy, but because it's right. Share this video with everyone you know who needs to hear that their small acts of kindness create ripples that last forever. That one decision can change everything, and that they have the power to be someone's miracle. And most importantly, the next time you see someone who needs help, remember Robert Coleman. Remember the father who walked through a storm because love doesn't require memory, it requires heart. Remember Marcus Johnson, who stopped when hundreds didn't, and changed the trajectory of countless lives. Remember Thomas Johnson, who was helped by a stranger and passed that lesson to his son. Remember that your decision to stop or keep driving will define who you are far more than your job title, or your bank account, or anything else the world tries to convince you matters. Robert's compass pointed north. Let it point your way too. Toward compassion, toward connection, toward the kind of life that matters long after we're gone, toward becoming the person you were always meant to be. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for listening to Robert's story, and thank you for carrying his legacy forward. Now, go be someone who stops. Because that's what heroes do. They stop. They show up. They save lives, one decision at a time. This is Golden Stories, reminding you that you are never just passing by. You are always one decision away from changing everything. Hit that subscribe button, share this story, and go make someone's day better just by being willing to stop. The world is counting on you.